The metapsychological archetype of the influencing machine was one of Victor Tausk's most significant theories according to Wilhelm Reich. In his paper, The Origin of the Influencing Machine in Schizophrenia, Tausk discussed about the origin of delusion common to many of his schizophrenic patients. He identified a fundamental theme in many of their reports: the belief that there was an alien-like device that would in some sense penetrate their existing state with energy, something remote and unknown, but would control their emotions and influence their feelings, motor phenomena, and induce other pathological illness. A famous case of this was expressed by the mad but genius James Tilly Matthews in the late 18th century. Diagnosed as the first ever identified paranoid schizophrenic, believed that a gang of criminals skilled in pneumatic chemistry were tormenting him by means of rays emitted by a machine which he called the Heirloom. Again, what could be regarded as a persecutory illusion, one of out-of-body mind control and penetrating influence. Tausk suggested a possible psychoanalytic causation for the development of these symptoms, one being of infantile regression to a much earlier stage in libidinal development. If one is to regress to an earlier stage of psychic life and development, then so is the entire structure of the psyche itself. Infantile regression may therefore cause for a lack in ego boundaries. Having an unstable ego separates the libido from the psychic ego structure, leading to the rejection of one's what you could call reason of being, and thus the physical body itself as subject. This may lead into the loss of physical and mental individuality, causing the psychotic to see and comprehend thoughts and other excitations as coming only from the outside world. This psychotic state of being relates directly to early developmental stages when they were, in the past, had no ego-identified comprehension and thought. Similar to how a child would experience the world prior to the mirror stage, in Lacanian terms, of ego development. This possibility directly concludes us to understanding what the possible conditions are that may be required within the psyche to experience the archetypically described influencing machine that the patients of Victor Tausk treated. In relation to this, we can come to think of the development of fantasy or wish. Freud identified that the non-annexed state of memory traces from a primal experience can account for the patient's ability to form wish fantasy during the transference process, and in the process finding a compulsion to repeat. But this may also be the case with excitations for the schizophrenic, when no object relations or cathexis is allocated to the surges in libidinal energy. This may induce a compulsion to repeat the delusions and fantasy, especially if it is the case that the ego and the individuality of the person has disintegrated with the advent of psychotic infantile regression. Tausk writes the following: the separation of the libido from the psychic ego, i.e. the rejection and condemnation of one's reason of being of the psychic person, brings with it the rejection of the physical person, the tendency to physically self-destruct. There occurs a consecutive separation of the libido from those organs that guarantee the functioning and the value of physical individuality, a separation by means of which the organ's function is impaired or given up. End quote. According to Tausk, the phenomena of what you could call the influencing apparatus is a projection of the patient's own body. Thus, Wilhelm Reich writes the following in his book Function of the Orgasm. Tausk was right. What the schizophrenic patient experiences as the persecutor is really he himself. I can add now, because he cannot cope with his vegetative currents that are breaking through, he must feel them as alien, to be part of an outer world filled with malicious purpose. Schizophrenia only show a grotesque degree, a condition that characterizes man of today quite generally. The average human being of today has lost contact with his real nature, with his biological core, and experience it as hostile and alien. He must of necessity hate anybody who tries to bring him into contact with it." End quote. But can this be applied to any particular development in modern contemporary phenomena? The general structure to modern conspiracy theory could be hypothesized as identical to the experienced schizophrenic phenomena of the influencing machine. Like the influencing machine, or influencing apparatus, modern conspiracy conspires to explain that there are processes going on that intend to influence and control your behaviours, thoughts, feelings, and actions. That there are forces from the outside world that intend on controlling and using us. Most often it is the case that for the radical conspirator, hard evidence and logic fails at ridifying the conspiracy itself, indicating to us that this is more than just theoretical, but also fantasy and delusion. For example, mass global surveillance was a conspiracy theory many years ago, before the acceleration of technological development. Most people back in the day would have called you a fool, deluded and paranoid if you expressed this kind of opinion. Yet it is something that became a reality today and is still developing. Gang stalking is another modern conspiracy theory that holds the same archetypal aspects of the influencing machine that Tausk identified. Similar to the likes of chemtrails, or the others like the HARP project. But the phenomena of the influencing apparatus gets even more interesting when we think of what the internet and computer actually is. Tausk's conclusion of infantile regression and the projection of the body as possible cause for the influencing apparatus in schizophrenics matches the way in which we associate ourselves with the computer, and in return how there has been an increase in conspiratorial theory on a global scale. As I have said before, the phenomenological impact of the internet and its association to the developing psyche of the youth has been extremely detrimental. As you may remember from a previous video, I was talking about how the body is becoming the shadow as we speak, due to the use of the internet and development of the technological singularity. This upholds the general view that Tausk's observation of infantile regression is not only adequate to his theory of the influencing machine, but accurate to how the human is also regressing to an infantile state of codependence, with our intended infusion with AI itself. How AI is producing a schizophrenic approach to personality development, identifications and delusions that we end up introjecting into ourselves. We can see this, for example, with the consistent obsession that young people have with things like BuzzFeed personality quizzes, mimetic personalities on the internet, and even political identities, which harpers straight back to Tausk's observation of schizophrenia itself. That through infantile regression, the individual never develops a stable ego identity. It instead is always fluctuating, never settled, never grounded, and as being the case, experiences the functions of thought, feeling, and emotion through a form of external influence. As of today, it is the digital influence which is leading us to regress back into an infantile state, which is insidiously propagated by the digital anima herself. And it is this machine that has become implanted into our own vision and consciousness. We need to understand that the internet, for many young people today, has been used in a way to collectivize their personality, to treat the computer as a guiding principle of wisdom, you could say, with given reciprocal reward. Freud said that shock is dependent on apprehension. But when we are so intertwined with the computer, its influence works in the same way as reality does itself. It is, of course, a simulation of reality. Therefore, it simulates all manners of our physical experience and influences all the many response. It all depends on how well integrated we are with it, to see how ungrounded the ego is on a mass psychological scale, to determine and understand why there is consistent flux with personality and identity, and of course, how and why people are so desperately inspired by what you could call conspiracy today. With this deconstruction of a stable psychology, the internet can both act as an external influencer to the mind, but also as a mimetic breeding ground for global infection, especially when the internet becomes part of our own identity. But it is not just this that is an interesting insight. Schizophrenic delusion within the mind of the given person perpetuates the delusion to be real no matter what. But could it be possible that such psychological bias eventually makes itself real? If we look at past conspiracy, many have become a reality, you could say. For example, the conspiracy of mass surveillance. So is it not possible that those which do become a reality become real out of the insight that can be made from them? That such delusions reveal a dent within the collective psychology of a given people that can be used against them or for them in the furthering development of society and technology, for maybe even economic intentions and big capital. For example, look at the influx of surveillance and security protection in the past 50 or so years, and how it is often branded as a means of protecting us and keeping us safe from the so-called bad guys. But if we look carefully with a degree of perspectivism, could it be possible that the old conspiracy of paranoiac surveillance back in the day revealed a form of psychological insecurity in the populace, and that itself was used as an unconscious motive for the development in economic growth and the progression of society, by using the paranoia and insecurity revealed from the conspiracy as a deceptive benefit to support and care for their own paranoia?